Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this DCR webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We will go ahead and get started in just 1 minute. Some folks join here just at the top of the hour. Great. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today, so I want to make sure we have time to get through it all and also cover questions and answers. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the content. So again, welcome and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Carolyn Heaps-Beccaro, and I am a Senior Resilience Planner at the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. As you're joining us, you should be automatically muted. So you'll note that your mic should be muted. You do have the capability to come off of mute, but we do ask that you try to stay muted throughout the presentation portion. And then once we get to the Q&A at the end of the session, we'll offer the opportunity for you to come off of mute and ask your questions live if you choose to do so. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat at any time. So if you do have a question about something that we're actively discussing, go ahead and do that, and we'll make sure to try to get to that at the end of the session. I also want to flag, you should have gotten a notice, but today's session is being recorded so that we can share it with folks who are unable to join us live. So just please be aware of that as you are joining us. Okay, so this session today is all about the flood hazard data, but before we get into that, I did want to share just a little bit of background on the DCR Office of Resilience Planning. So our mission is to distribute knowledge and coordinate action to achieve a flood resilient future through informed planning and intergovernmental solutions. We do this work through 4 major lines of effort. Firstly, we develop and implement a Commonwealth's state-led flood resilience plan. So that includes the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan and the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. We'll be talking about both of those plans quite a lot today. In addition to that, we work together with others to coordinate action. We share data, information, and resources to support informed decision-making about present and future flood risks. And then finally, we connect with stakeholders and the public in order to inform those plans I mentioned, but also to build general awareness about changing flood risks in Virginia. So today's webinar will really focus on that third category, the data, information, and resources. And I'll be sharing information that we as an office make available about flood hazards for the Commonwealth. We have 2 sets of flood hazard data that I'll be presenting on today. Firstly, data produced or procured, for the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. And then secondly, data produced for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Both of those data sets were developed or acquired not only with the plan itself in mind, but also with other potential end users of that data. And both data sets are relevant to use in other kind of flood resilience contexts and needs, including writing and scoping grant applications and awards, what we're here to talk about today. So before I get into the data itself, what is the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan? Well, we know that flood risks exist and are increasing statewide. Anywhere it rains, it can flood. And so statewide and state level action is needed to help address this risk in the decades to come. DCR is developing the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan to meet this need. The plan is a codified requirement and is going to be a tool for the Commonwealth to use in advancing our policies and programs that lessen the impacts of flooding on people, the economy, and the environment. So we started developing this plan back in late summer of 2024, and we're currently in the process of finalizing it for release and finalizing that development. However, even though the plan itself has not yet been released, the flood hazard secured for that plan is now available to use for other purposes, including, again, grant writing. So the second plan that I mentioned and the second major kind of set of data that I'll be discussing today is data for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. As sea levels rise and severe weather intensifies, flooding is increasingly prevalent, particularly in coastal Virginia. DCR is tasked with developing, administering, and implementing this plan to help the Commonwealth better address the unique challenges faced by the coastal region when it comes to flood risks. We're currently working on phase 2 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan that's currently under development. And when it's released, that will offer a comprehensive, forward-looking analysis of flood risk from all major flood sources, while also identifying opportunities to create impactful solutions. So this plan is more place-specific and focused on, specific projects and gaps that exist in the coastal region when compared to the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. The plan is designed to meet the needs of practitioners who play key roles in flood resilience and is particularly catered to meet the needs of government decision makers. And again, although the plan is not yet released, the flood hazard data that we developed for the plan is complete and is fully available for folks to use. So throughout the rest of today's webinar, we're going to cover the following topics. Firstly, why you would want to consider using the data sets from the 2 plans that I just mentioned. The details of those data sets, so what it is, what the data is, what it isn't, how to access it. And then opportunities to use the data for your Community Flood Preparedness Fund applications, both in terms of meeting the application requirements and also scoping your activity to leverage the data as you work on implementation. And then finally, I'm hoping to reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. As I said before, you are welcome to put questions in the chat at any time, and we'll get to those at the end. And we'll also have an opportunity for you to enter additional questions when we get to that portion. I want to emphasize that we are not going to provide a general or complete overview of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund Round 6 manual, the web grants portal, or any other topics related to the CFPF in general terms. If you do have general questions about the fund, we really encourage you to join one of the upcoming office hour sessions. There's one more session remaining on the 24th at 10 a.m. You can also contact us, contact DCR using that information at the bottom of your screen, or we'll be sending out some training slides as a follow-up to this webinar before the end of the week, and you can take a look at those to help you with that as well. So although I'm not going to cover the CFPF in detail, I did just want to provide a basic overview of the fund so that we all kind of joining this conversation have a common reference point for the rest of this discussion. So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is now in its 6th round, and it's currently open and accepting applications until December 1st. The purpose of the fund is to support regions and localities to reduce the impacts of flooding. So that includes addressing not only regulated present-day flood hazards, but any known areas of flooding, as well as areas where flooding is anticipated to become more frequent and severe in the years to come. There are multiple categories of funding that are available, including capacity building and planning. Those awards are intended to support the development and implementation of comprehensive approaches to flooding. In particular, it prioritizes vulnerability assessments and resilience plans. Second category is studies. These are intended to improve long-term planning and the effectiveness of resilience plans and projects. And then lastly, projects. And these are activities which prevent the loss of life and reduce property damage caused by flooding. Any organization that is looking to submit an application to the fund should thoroughly review the manual to understand the terms of the grant beyond what we're going to discuss in this webinar. And I also want to highlight that although the purpose of this webinar is to highlight the benefits of using DCR's data in developing an application, the use of this data is not mandatory. So you're not required to use this data. And even using the data is not going to get you preferential scoring as long as you meet the requirements in another way. So we encourage you to use this data. We think it's a great resource for you to use, but I want to emphasize it's not going to give you improved scoring as long as you're meeting all of the application requirements in a different way. Okay, so say you're interested in submitting an application to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. A few things to consider. When you're scoping an activity to submit to the fund, it's important to keep in mind that applicants are not eligible to receive project funding until they have submitted and received approval for a resilience plan. So if you want to do a project, you have to have a plan first. If you are developing a resilience plan, you cannot rely exclusively on FEMA's special flood hazard areas to define areas of flood risk. So those kind of traditional flood insurance rate maps, the tools available through the National Flood Hazard Layer that FEMA provides, are not going to be able to meet the requirements of what needs to be included when it comes to flood hazard data in your resilience plan. So additional flood hazard data sets must be presented and to ensure that the flood hazards presented are comprehensive and incorporate those changing flood conditions. And then finally, this is a new update with the current manual. Funded studies cannot duplicate existing data or studies. So if you're developing a study, you have to first ensure that your study is not going to duplicate existing efforts. So say you've done all that work, you've kind of figured out what activity you're gonna submit. Once you have that activity in mind, once you're crafting your application, when you're figuring out how to use flood hazard data in your application, you should keep in mind that your narrative must include information about the flood problems and the factors that are contributing to them. And then specifically, if you're applying for project funding, keep in mind that the application must include supporting documentation about the flood risks in the project area. So, considering all of these factors, our recommendation is to use DCR's flood hazard data in the following two primary ways. Firstly, to support implementation of your funded activity. So from the start, as you're figuring out what you want to propose, plan to use the data where it's appropriate rather than recreating it. So for example, if you're developing a resilience plan, you can directly incorporate the available data as your flood hazard data of choice rather than recreating things like rainfall-driven or coastal flood hazard data that includes future conditions. And then secondly, as you work on crafting your application and developing your scope of work narrative as part of that application package, um, think through how to justify your proposal and the need for this work. One way to do this is to use the flood hazard data to do things like provide a simple screenshot in your application, which demonstrates the extent of flooding in the proposed intervention area. So say you're developing a resilience plan, that could be a screenshot of flooding across your entire locality. Or if you're doing a particular study or project area, you might want to zoom in on those and provide justification through a screenshot that's a little bit more targeted. So for both of these recommended uses that I just talked through on the right side of the screen, we're going to provide some additional examples to support you later on in the slide deck, coming back to these kind of light bulb icons and this wording. So keep these in mind as we go through the rest of the deck today. So as I just covered on the last screen, the CFPF does ask applicants to supplement FEMA data with additional non-regulatory flood hazard information for your resilience plans to be approved. And further, the purpose of the fund itself is to, recognize that flooding is changing and future conditions are something worth considering. We began discussing already kind of the ways that the DCR data can help you to be responsive to those requirements. But beyond that, we know that Virginia's floodplain managers, emergency managers, planners, all of you all kind of as practitioners in the flood resilience space on the screen and joining this webinar today are really committed to doing the best work using the best available data to create a flood resilient future. So why is using an alternative data set to FEMA's data a good idea in general, beyond just fulfilling the requirements of the CFPF? Well, firstly, we know that rainfall-driven flooding and other types of flooding are underrepresented in FEMA's maps. So analysis that we conducted for the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan found that the FEMA data could be underrepresenting the base flood condition by as many as 5,700 square miles across the entire state. Secondly, FEMA's traditional flood hazard data products that are most widely available include only the 1% annual chance flood or the 100-year flood, and sometimes also the 0.2% annual chance flood, the 500-year flood. And while that data is really helpful, without additional information about floods that could occur more frequently than that, it's difficult to fully understand and prioritize efforts to address flood risks. So we did a pilot study for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan to look into this, and we found that the likelihood of riverine flooding in areas with additional flood hazard data does go under recognized and under communicated without those additional flood hazard probabilities beyond the 1% chance flood. In that study, we conducted some additional analysis and found that nearly half of the buildings in the pilot study area were shown as being exposed to the 1% annual chance flood, but actually had a 10% chance of flooding in any given year. Of course, that 10% chance is much higher than a 1% chance, and that additional risk goes underreported and unresponded to if you don't have higher frequency, additional multi-frequency flood hazard data. And then last but not least, the frequency and severity of flooding is changing statewide due to sea level rise and changing precipitation patterns. This is especially true in coastal Virginia, but is also true statewide. According to the analysis that we have conducted for the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan, an additional 54,000 buildings could be exposed to the 1% annual chance flood by the year 2060 when compared to baseline conditions. So that's a 20% increase over current building exposure levels. So ultimately, practitioners are increasingly being asked to turn to flood hazard data that addresses these three challenges by incorporating all major forms of flooding, by providing information about multiple frequency flood events, and by including forecasts for future conditions. And the DCR flood hazard data that I'm about to share with you can help you to fill those gaps. So let's get into the details. I'm going to start with the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. This data is available for the entire state, the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. It does incorporate all major flood hazards or all major forms of flooding. The products are available for inland flooding that includes rainfall-driven or pluvial and riverine or fluvial flood hazards, as well as coastal data. The data does provide information about those different flood return frequencies or recurrence intervals that I was talking about. You can see the 5 different frequencies that are provided here on the screen. It also includes forecasts for both baseline and future conditions. We have 4 future scenarios that cover the 2060 and the 2100 time horizons. Within each of these 2 time horizons, there are 2 different options that can be used to represent climate model uncertainty. So the 50th percentile, you can see it up in the right-hand side of this screen. The 50th percentile data we recommend treating as a moderate scenario and using it in cases with normal levels of risk tolerance. It represents a more likely future. And then we also have the 83rd percentile option available. This we recommend treating as a high scenario, which would be more appropriate for uses where you've got low risk tolerance, and this represents a less likely but possible future. The data is available as a 10-meter raster file, depth grid file for the entire state. And both the 1% annual exceedance probability, or that 1 in 100-year flood, and the 500-year flood, or the 0.2% annual exceedance probability conditions in the baseline scenario are publicly available. So those 2 data sets, anybody can access, anybody can see online, and I'll go through how to access them. However, all other data products that are mentioned on the screen, the other recurrence intervals and the future conditions, all of that is not publicly available, but can be licensed from DCR at no cost. The reason that is not publicly available is because DCR has licensed the data from Fathom, which is a third-party data provider. And the terms of our agreement with Fathom say that we can sublicense it to other users, particularly other Virginia government entities. That does include Virginia tribal governments. And if that government entity is working with a consulting firm to do their flood resilience work, we can also name the consulting firm as being able to license that data as well. There are some limitations on how the data can be distributed and shared even once you're under the sublicense agreement, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Of course, there's limitations with any data set. First and foremost, this data is based on desktop analysis using remotely sensed data. So it's important to keep that in mind. Additionally, as I mentioned, not all of the data can be provided publicly. And it's also important to keep in mind the resolution of this data. So this is a 10-meter resolution file. It's important to consider whether that resolution is high enough for your needs when determining whether or not you want to go ahead and use this data set. So how do you access the data? Well, there's multiple options. Again, I mentioned that public versus private access, or restricted access, I should say. The various options they vary in terms of their required level of familiarity with spatial data tools, as well as the different formats. But from left to right, the options increase in terms of their ease of use. So they get harder to use, more difficult, more complicated the farther to the right. But also the options increase in the amount of kind of flexibility that they afford across the screen from left to right. So I'm going to talk through these in slides to come. If you are interested in getting access to the data that is not publicly available, the best thing to do is to send us an email. Our email address is at the top of the screen there, flood.resilience@dcr.virginia.gov. Send us an email, let us know you're interested in signing an end user license agreement, and we can enter into that agreement with you and get you access to the data and information. If you're interested in just getting access to the publicly available data, there's some different ways to do that, but a good place to go is the Flood Resilience Open Data Portal, which will help direct you to some of these other platforms. So this slide provides a little bit more details comparing those different options against one another. I won't read through all of this. We will make these slides available to you as part of the follow-up materials. So I know this is very information heavy. There's a lot of information here. Please rest assured that you will get a copy of this in writing as well, so you don't need to worry too much about all the details right now. There's two options for simply viewing the data. The first is to navigate through the Virginia Flood Risk Information System, or VFRIS. I'm going to demo that in just a second. Alternatively, you can visit some of our more streamlined viewers that are available on that Flood Resilience Open Data Portal that I just mentioned. And then if you want a little bit more flexibility to create more limited feature maps, for example, kind of layering the flood hazard data together with asset data that you might have, something like that, you can use the ArcGIS REST Services directory. Again, I'll demo that in just a second. And lastly, sublicensing, I just talked about that in user license agreement. Again, if you're interested in that, please send us an email. Okay, so how do you find this data in VFRIS? I'm going to play a quick video. Hopefully this shows up for you all and streams live. But navigate to the Virginia Flood Risk Information System. The URL for that web page is down in the bottom left of the screen. And then you want to go and open the map view. This map viewer will let you see the different flood layers and engage with the map in a more interactive format. So click on that second tab in the map viewer called Layers and scroll down a little bit, and that's where you'll be able to toggle on the different Fathom flood hazard layers. So those are the layers that are the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan data that we're talking about right now. So right now, the screen is showing, hopefully it's updating for you all, the 1% annual chance according to Fathom. You can toggle on the National Flood Hazard layers, the NFHL, turn on and off the different sublayers within that you're interested in to just see the special flood hazard area from FEMA. You can compare that to the Fathom data, see where it differs, where it aligns. We can see that there is a pretty sizable difference here in Harrisonburg, where I'm zoomed into for this video. And then you can also access the 500-year floodplain area through this. So you can use one or both. And as you're developing your CFPF scope of work narrative, this might be something that you want to do to help you with your proposal, outlining again the specific problem being solved and the factors contributing. You might navigate to an area of interest to you on the map and then take a screenshot of this to include in your narrative to highlight the kind of existing flood challenges in a given location. Okay. So that was VFRIS. The next thing I'm going to demo is accessing the public Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan data via our REST Services directory. So for this, you'll want to navigate to our Flood Resilience Open Data portal. Once you're there, you can scroll down a bit on the page. It's actually kind of all the way at the bottom. There's additional data access options section that gets you to a link to our ArcGIS REST services directory. You can see this list of different options here and click on the Virginia Fathom Public folder. Here you can click into the data layer. This is the 1% annual chance or the 100-year extent. And then you can choose your desired viewing application, either opening it on an ArcGIS Pro, or you can open it in just your web browser. And similarly, this would allow you to take a screenshot, or if you're wanting to layer that together with additional asset data or project footprint data that you might have available as a shapefile, you could do that in ArcGIS Pro. So this option is useful in particular if you want to create those simple maps for your CFPF application, just demonstrating again kind of how the flooding interacts with assets of importance that you're proposing to work on through your project. For example, if you've got critical infrastructure assets as a shapefile and you want to combine that information within your application. Okay, so that was the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan data, the Fathom data. We just covered that, what it is, its limitations, how to access it. I'm going to switch gears now and share some information about the Coastal Resilience Master Plan data. So this data is available for the coastal region, which includes the entirety of the 8 easternmost planning district commissions in the Commonwealth. So from Northern Virginia in the north down to kind of Crater PDC and this in the south, kind of west side, over east, the Eastern Shore, all of those localities in that area. I do have a map a little bit later on that'll show you that area. The data is available for both coastal and rainfall-driven flood hazards. However, the riverine hazards aspect of this data set is a little bit more limited in terms of what it can provide. Both the coastal and rainfall-driven hazards were developed for this plan, but the riverine products are limited to data that was available via FEMA. The data does provide information about 7 different flood frequencies for those coastal and rainfall-driven events. You can see those listed on the screen here, and then we also have additional tidal conditions available for the coastal data. Again, this data is available for both baseline and future conditions, so I'll speak a little bit more about those in a future slide. When it comes to the data format and resolution, it is a little bit higher resolution than the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. It's available as a 10-foot resolution scale raster file across this area. And then another kind of major difference between this and the statewide data is that this data is free and open access to anyone to use. And beyond just the data itself, the methodology regarding its development is fully public and published in reports that are available online. So you can kind of see all of the background on how it was created and all of the methodology. So in addition to the hazard the data, that's available for each individual hazard, we also have a few different combined versions of the flood hazard data available. I do want to emphasize that this is not compound flooding. So these combined products are not showing what it would look like if coastal rainfall and riverine floods are all kind of happening simultaneously, modeled together. Instead, what the data is depicting is what types of flooding could occur at a given location for each respective flood hazard modeled for their 1% annual exceedance probability event. The combined products are available for both baseline and the 4 future planning scenarios. However, because we didn't model future conditions for riverine hazards for the plan, the riverine data within those combined scenarios, future scenarios, is held constant. There are 2 versions of the combined products. The first is the flood hazard presence, and the second is dominance. Presence, that's just shown up at the top of the screen here, shows every possible combination of flood hazard that it could occur at a given location, whereas dominance, which is on the bottom, shows which of the 3 flood hazards present would be deepest in a given location for that flood event. These tools could be useful for depicting different flood challenges present in an area of intervention proposed for CFPF funding. Again, meeting that requirement that the scope of work includes specific information about the problem being solved and the factors that contribute to that problem. So say you're proposing a detailed study in a particular flood-prone area, the combined flood presence map could help you articulate the need for that study to include modeling of a variety of different flood risks by demonstrating that those different flood risks do exist in that area. When it comes to the different planning scenarios or kind of future conditions available for the data, again, it's quite similar to what I shared about the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan data. We have baseline data, which is based on historical observed conditions, and then 4 future planning scenarios. Um, the planning scenarios leverage available guidance on changing conditions of sea level rise and precipitation from NOAA and Marissa to authoritative sources of this type of data, respectively. Um, there are the conditions cover 2 different time horizons, so the period from 2030 to 2060, and then additionally the period from 2060 to 2100. Those are the near future and far future, respectively. And then again, within each of those 2 time horizons, there are 2 options that represent the model uncertainty in the climate outcomes. And so the moderate scenario we would recommend for use with kind of normal levels of risk tolerance, and the high scenario we would recommend for lower levels of risk tolerance. As with the other data set, the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan data, there are limitations, which can be helpful to define what the data can be useful for and what you shouldn't use it for. One thing that we often get asked about with this data in particular is whether stormwater infrastructure was included. The answer is no, we did not include that. So the pluvial and rainfall-driven flood hazard data is going to be most accurate in areas that are either unserved by extensive stormwater infrastructure networks, or in cases where you're looking at less frequent return frequency events. So for example, the 1% annual chance flood, it's unlikely that your stormwater infrastructure is sized to manage those higher volume rainfall events, so this data might still be helpful to you. And then again, general disclaimer, of course, this is desktop analysis using remotely sensed data. It may or may not be an appropriate data set for whatever your particular use case is, so please consider that. Again, multiple ways to access the coastal data. This should look familiar in terms of the ease of use and the flexibility of application. Um, the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer, I do want to say, is currently only available for the coastal flood hazard data. We have not yet released an updated version of this Web Explorer for the Phase 2 plan. So if you're looking for only coastal hazards and impacts, that tool might be helpful to use. But if you really want to see the combined data or the pluvial data, it would be best to look to a different tool. Then secondly, similarly to the REST services that I mentioned for the statewide plan, you can also access all of the coastal hazard data mentioned on the prior slides through our ArcGIS REST services directory. We also have available files to download via our public file repository. And then lastly, we do have the engineering models. So the HEC-RAS 2D models that were developed to create the pluvial flood hazard data are also available. Those models are best accessed through a pluvial model catalog application that we have set up. All 4 of these different options for getting to the data are linked via our Flood Resilience Open Data Portal. So we recommend heading to that Open Data Portal as a good place to get started if you're interested in this data. So here's again a more detailed look at the different products and how they compare to one another. Again, I'm not going to talk through all of this information in detail, and we'll send you this as a follow-up. I will say if you are interested in using the public file repository to download data for custom analysis and mapping, which could be a really great way to go about getting access and kind of building upon additional analysis, we do recommend that you contact us. Right now, the folder structure is not the most intuitive. It's something that we're working on improving. But for the moment, some of the names of the different folders are not going to be super easy to navigate. So if you reach out to us, send us an email, we'll respond quickly and we can get you access to the thing that you're looking for a little bit more easily than you trying to navigate through it yourself. On the next slide, I'm going to provide a video for how to navigate that pluvial model catalog. And if you do have any questions about either the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer or the REST Services Directory, you're also always welcome to reach out to us as well. Okay, so I mentioned before the pluvial models. So again, these are the engineering models, the HEC-RAS 2D models that we use to develop the pluvial flood hazard data that is in the plan and available for use. So if you're an engineer and you're really interested in looking at these models or considering them for your project, this is how you would navigate to find those. So firstly, go to our Flood Resilience Open Data portal, find the pluvial model catalog within the list of applications. Once it loads up, you can kind of see what this looks like. Each of those is a sub-watershed basin. For each of these is kind of the area where each individual area has its own multiple, actually, HEC-RAS models associated with it. You can click into this viewer from the catalog application and see all of the different simulations that were run for the 2-hour, the 6-hour, and the 24-hour event at these different rainfall intervals. And you can also look and find those the depth grids from here. So this is demoing what that looks like, that interface. You can view it on a map. You can also download this. So this is really going to be best for, again, for engineers who are looking to use the models themselves. There is also a pluvial model use case guide available on the Flood Resilience Open Data portal and also linked in these slides. So when you get a copy of the slides, you'll be able to see that. The models are really going to be most useful for implementing activities. So you might want to build them into your scope of work for a CFPF funded activity. For example, you could use them to develop a study for a particular area of interest or to evaluate alternate project designs as part of initial kind of project development, perhaps as part of a plan. And if you have any questions, as always, please don't hesitate to contact us regarding these models. Okay, so I've covered a lot so far. Why you would want to use data other than FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, both to align with the CFPF and also to just conduct enhanced flood resilience activities. I covered how the two major data sets that DCR provides can help you meet your flood hazard data needs, including what the data is, what it isn't, and how to access that data. The last thing we're going to cover are 3 examples of actual activities that are funded by the Community Flood Preparedness Fund that use DCR's data, either in their implementation or to justify their application as part of their application packages. You will notice that all 3 of these examples feature the use of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan data. That's largely because the data for the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan hasn't been on the street very long. So we haven't had applications use this in a robust way yet. However, a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about when it comes to the examples for the coastal data could potentially be replicated with the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan or the FATHM data. So this first example is a case where the Coastal Resilience Master Plan flood hazard data was used to support implementation of a CFPF-funded activity. Here, the City of Newport News is developing a CFPF-funded stormwater master plan, resilience plan, and floodplain management plan with support from, again, CFPF. As part of that effort, the pluvial, the rainfall-driven flood hazards that we developed for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan was analyzed by accessing the depth grids for the present day and near term 24-hour 1% annual chance event through DCR's public file repository. So in this case, they went and they downloaded that data to use and analyze. This was then applied across the planning effort in multiple ways, including an analysis of roads exposed to flooding. So that's that map we see on the left here, as well as to identify rainfall hotspots, areas where rainfall flooding is a potential hotspot. That's shown on the right. These were generated using precipitation flood extent with a weight applied for the depth of flooding, and flooding hotspots were identified both for present day and near-term flooding conditions to understand where flooding could be getting worse or expanding across the city. So again, CFPF resilience plans do have to include all flooding occurring in a community, including areas beyond the special flood hazard areas that FEMA has mapped. And the CRMP data, as exemplified by this example, can help you accomplish that. The second example that I'm sharing is also a use case where the Coastal Resilience Master Plan data was used in developing a CFPF-funded resilience plan. So here, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and Northampton Village, or excuse me, Northampton County, Oyster Village, this is on the Eastern Shore, developed a coastal adaptation and resilience plan that leveraged the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, both coastal and fluvial data. So the depth rasters and graduated floodplain files were accessed through DCR's REST services and used to conduct a visual and quantitative assessment of flood exposure across various different planning conditions. That included identifying areas subject to rainfall-driven flooding during the 24-hour 1% annual chance flood event that's shown on the left. And then later on in the planning process, they also use the data for initial kind of project design and evaluation phase. The pluvial HECRAS model for the area was accessed through that pluvial model catalog that we saw, and then was used to conduct some hydraulic analysis. Specifically, it was used to evaluate the impact of constructing an earthen berm and a bulkhead stem wall alignment on rainfall depths in this area in Oyster Village. The simulated water surface elevation and flood depth were analyzed for conditions both with and without the kind of project concepts, in order to improve the understanding of what sort of drainage improvements would be needed in this area for the project to be functional. So this made things a lot more efficient for that project team, both from the early stage analysis that we see on the left here of the resilience planning through to kind of conceptual project design that was included in this particular resilience plan. And Oyster Village now has gotten their resilience plan approved. So this one has been approved and did receive grant funding in round 5 of the CFPF to support engineering design drawings for that bulkhead and stem wall replacement work that they started using the HECRAS models for in the planning process. So that's great. We'd love to see kind of the progression of plans to implementation. The final example that I'll share today is a case where the Coastal Resilience Master Plan data was used in developing a CFPF application for a resilience plan. So here, James City County included flood exposure and impact statistics in their round 5 CFPF application that were actually pulled right from the Coastal Resilience Master Plan document itself to support their narrative around coastal flood exposure and impacts in the broader region. They pulled statistics related to impacts as well as exposure, and those were used in conjunction with some custom mapping that they did. However, you could also just kind of screenshot this data directly from the Web Explorer. If you are interested in this coastal hazards specifically, they are outlined in the Phase 1 Coastal Resilience Master Plan, Chapter 3. You can find that on our website or in the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer, the current version, which again is limited to only those coastal hazards. So again, CFPF applications do need to include supporting documentation on flood risk in the project area, but meeting that requirement doesn't have to require complex technical analysis or GIS tools. You can really leverage available products that are already available through DCR in order to help you craft that narrative. The county has been awarded CFPF funding to create its resilience plan, and then we have been in conversations with them about continuing to use the data from the plan in their actual plan development as well. Okay, this is my last slide here before we get into questions and answers. This slide is a little bit distinct from the others. This is not related to the flood hazard data, but is something else that is an update with round 6 of the CFPF that I wanted to highlight and make sure folks were aware of. So the round 6 manual includes a new requirement that any successful applicants located within coastal Virginia have to upload information about their ward to the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer projects and initiatives inventory. This only applies to areas within the coastal region. So I mentioned before those kind of the areas within any of the 8 easternmost planning district commissions. This map at the top right is showing the localities where that applies to. The requirement does apply to all award types except for staff capacity building efforts. Those are not required to be submitted. We do encourage awardees to submit their award information to the projects and initiatives inventory as soon as possible after their grant agreement is executed, or even before if you feel so inclined to just include it anyway, because awardees will not be eligible to receive reimbursement for work under the grant until they have submitted that information. So what is the projects and initiatives inventory? The inventory is housed in the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer that I've mentioned a couple of times, that online tool that complements the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. The purpose of the inventory is to serve as a living resource of planned, ongoing, and completed flood resilience projects and initiatives in coastal Virginia. We keep it updated on about an annual basis by DCR to support the provision of timely information on opportunities to build flood resilience in coastal Virginia. So again, if you do receive a CFPF award in round 6, you can upload information about your award to the inventory to meet this requirement if you're located in coastal Virginia. There is an online user portal that allows project owners and initiative owners to submit information directly to us for review and approval. Once we do review and approve that information, it automatically appears in the Web Explorer. However, if you have any questions or issues or just need assistance submitting your data into the portal, you can always contact us and we will help you navigate that and get it uploaded to appear. So with that, I'm going to transition now to questions and answers. We'll take a look at see if there's anything in the chat already, but also feel free to add new questions in there. Also feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you to come off of mute. If there are any questions that we don't get a chance to get to today, I will try to send follow-up emails to everybody, answering your questions individually. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody here.
Carolyn, we don't have any questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay. Well, does anybody have anything that they want to either?
Oh, got a couple now.
Great.
One from C. Newton. Are there any grants available to Shenandoah Valley counties?
Yes. So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is open to all local governments in Virginia. So that includes counties in the Shenandoah Valley, certainly. So would encourage you to check out the Community Flood Preparedness Fund website, look at that manual to learn more about those grants or attend those upcoming office hours, so forth. We'll circulate some more information about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund in general as part of the follow-up.
And then we have one from Gabrielle Kinney. Thank you, Carolyn, for subleasing the FPMP Fathom data. Are there costs associated for the locality?
There are no costs for localities. So yeah, if you are eligible to sublicense the data from DCR, that is a no cost and user license agreement that you would enter into. It's a 12-month renewable license. And it's a I would say pretty simple, pretty straightforward process. We send you a template, you take a look at the template, fill out exactly what data you want access to, and we can help you with that. And then we give you access to an online portal where you can go and download the data. Again, it's free for if you're a local government or another type of eligible entity.
And sure, I think you kind of addressed this, but Sherwin asks about how long does it take to get the Fathom data sublicensing worked out?
Yeah, it's I would say it's pretty quick. We've been able to turn around agreements within a week or two. It kind of depends on how long it takes on your end. Obviously, we're familiar with the terms and it would be new to you. So it depends on, how far you need to run it up the chain within your organization for review and approval and that sort of thing. But if you're able to turn it around pretty fast, we're able to get you access pretty quickly. I will say, because the deadline for CFPF round 6 is coming up pretty quickly here, and I know it's like right after Thanksgiving and all of that, I would recommend relying more on the publicly available data sets and viewers if you're looking to use the data in crafting your application. But if you're interested in doing more analysis as part of your, for example, a resilience plan that's funded by CFPF, that's certainly something where downloading the data would absolutely be relevant, and we could turn it around to you pretty quickly. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I am going to just drop our email address in the chat here. So there's one more question that popped up. You mentioned limitations include stormwater structures. I assume this includes other structures as well. Does the data provided cover residual risks due to levee and dam failures? So the data does include some kind of major structures. There's differences between the two data sets when it comes to those details, and I can follow up with you to have a more in-depth conversation about that if it would be helpful. But it does not include any kind of dam failure risk. That is not something that's modeled. Like the case of having a dam failure and the flood risk that would result from that are not modeled in either of the two data sets. Yeah. Any other questions? Would the sublicensed data be available even if not used for CFPF funded projects or studies? Absolutely. Yeah. See, this whole webinar, we wanted to draw attention to the opportunity to use the data for this purpose for CFPF funded projects and studies, but this data is available for any flood resilience related work, any kind of flood risk mitigation work that you may be doing, as long as you are an eligible entity to participate in having a sublicense. So absolutely, if you're interested in using the data for a different purpose, I know we've got some state agencies on here, for example, that are not going to be applying for CFPF directly, but might want to use the data for other purposes. Absolutely, that data is available for other applications. And we are hoping to do some additional webinars and additional training, that sort of thing, different use cases that would be relevant, that focus less on CFPF and other applications of the data. I'll be sending out, as part of the follow-up to this meeting, a survey. And if you have other kind of things that you would like to learn more about how the data could be used in different applications, please include that as part of your survey response. We'd love to hear that information so that we can help cater the resources that we're providing to you. Okay. Great. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us today. I just mentioned that we'll be sending a follow-up survey. We will be reaching out with the slides, as well as some general CFPF slides, and links to sign up for our newsletter if you didn't already opt in, all of that type of stuff. So take a look at those as they become available in your inbox a little bit later this week. We'd love to hear from you. And if you do use the data, please let us know how you use it. We'd love to hear that. Of course, we'll see it if it comes in a CFPF application, but if you use it for something else, we would love to know how you're using it. So get in touch. We're here, we're friendly, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.